There was a laminated spreadsheet on my mother's kitchen table, my family's names down one column, dollar amounts down the other, my own name near the bottom, next to a number that came out to 8% of the $4.2 million. I'd won exactly 1 week earlier. The lamination itself struck me before anything else, the specific, deliberate effort of running a piece of paper through a machine to protect it, the kind of thing you do for a document you intend to keep, to reference, to treat as final. My mother tapped the page twice with one finger and said, "This is what's fair, given everything this family's done for you." Around the table, I counted 11 other people, aunts, cousins, my brother, all of them quiet, all of them apparently already having seen this document before I had. I looked at that number for a long time before I said a single word back to her. Welcome to Sweet Payback Stories. Tonight's story begins with a laminated spreadsheet and ends with a family finally understanding that money you never actually had was never actually yours to plan around. My name is Naomi Castellano. I'm 36 years old and I work as an actuary, the kind of job most people don't fully understand, but that essentially means I spend my entire professional life calculating risk, reading fine print, and asking the specific, careful questions that keep insurance companies from getting blindsided by numbers they didn't see coming. I want you to hold onto that particular skill because it turned out to be exactly what my family never accounted for when they decided, quietly, well before they ever said a word to me, how much of my winnings actually belonged to them. I bought that ticket at a gas station outside Columbus, on my way back from a work conference, the kind of impulsive, $5 decision you make standing in line for coffee without thinking twice about it. The cashier barely looking up as she handed it over with my change. I found out I'd won 3 days later, sitting at my own kitchen table on a Tuesday night, running the numbers through the state lottery's official app 4 separate times before I let myself believe it, my hands actually shaking by the third check. I called my parents that same evening, genuinely excited, my voice cracking a little as I told my mother, wanting to share something joyful with the people who raised me, with absolutely no idea what that phone call would eventually set into motion. She screamed, actually screamed, with what I took at the time for pure, uncomplicated joy on my behalf. I understand now that some of that scream was already doing arithmetic. I want to be clear that the demand for 92% of my winnings didn't arrive in one dramatic conversation. It built, incrementally, over that first week, small enough at each individual step to seem almost reasonable, in isolation. My brother texted asking about a loan for a truck he'd been eyeing, framing it casually, "Just help me out a little once things clear." My mother mentioned, during a phone call 2 days later, some medical costs that had been weighing on her and my father, nothing specific yet, just a general, worried reference. My cousin brought up tuition for her daughter at a family barbecue that same weekend, almost apologetically, prefacing it with, "I hate to even ask." Each request small, each one, on its own, the kind of thing you might genuinely want to help with. It wasn't until I sat down one evening, a full week after that first phone call, and actually added every request together on a piece of scratch paper, that I understood what I was actually looking at. The numbers came to nearly the entire sum. My brother let something slip during a family dinner that same week that reframed everything for me. He mentioned, casually, almost proudly, that he'd already put a down payment on the truck he'd texted me about, since, in his words, the money was basically already coming. I remember setting my fork down very slowly, doing the math on what that sentence actually meant. My family wasn't asking me for help. They were treating my payout as though it had already been divided, dispersed, and spent, entirely inside their own heads, before I'd made a single decision about any of it myself. The call from the advance company came 4 days after that dinner, a woman with a professionally warm phone voice explaining that she was reaching out to finalize the details on an advance application, referencing paperwork I had absolutely no memory of ever seeing or signing. Lottery winnings advance companies, for anyone unfamiliar, are a real, legal, and deeply predatory corner of the financial world, businesses that offer to buy future payout rights for a steep discount, sometimes cents on the dollar, preying specifically on people who need cash faster than a structured payout can provide it. I told her as calmly as I could manage with my heart suddenly hammering that I had never applied for anything of the kind, and she paused, clearly confused herself, before agreeing to look into the discrepancy on her end. I requested the paperwork directly from that company the following morning, citing my legal right as the actual verified winner, and what came back sent a cold, sinking feeling straight through me. A preliminary application had genuinely been submitted using my identifying information, my full legal name, my date of birth, details that could only have come from someone inside my own family. My mother was listed as the primary point of contact throughout the application. The signature line, thankfully, still sat empty, waiting on an authorization that had never actually been given. I called an attorney that same day, a sharp, unhurried woman named Farah who specializes in exactly this kind of situation, and she confirmed, after reviewing everything I'd gathered, that the deal legally required my own personal signature and could never have closed without it. No fraud had technically occurred yet, but the application itself, filled out in careful specific detail about my payout structure, proved something almost as unsettling as fraud would have: premeditation. My family hadn't stumbled into asking for help. They'd been quietly planning how to access my winnings before I'd even finished celebrating them. I went through some old paperwork with my mother the following week, framing it gently as wanting to understand everyone's actual needs fairly before I made any decisions, and found, tucked into a folder of unrelated bills, an old collections notice for my father's cardiac procedure from 2 years earlier, still being slowly paid down in installments neither of them had ever mentioned to me. I sat with that discovery for a long time. It didn't excuse anything that had happened over the previous 2 weeks. It did complicate it, revealing a real, unaddressed financial fear sitting underneath at least part of what had started to feel like pure entitlement. At a tense family dinner not long after, my cousin Dahlia, visibly frustrated with the whole arrangement herself, finally said out loud what nobody else had been willing to admit directly. The family had already drafted an entire year of budgets, assuming my payout, my parents' mortgage paid off, a new roof for their house, a wedding fund for my youngest cousin, an entire year of financial planning built, in careful, specific detail, around money that had never actually belonged to any of them. They had spreadsheets before you even called Mom back that first night, Delia said, not quite meeting my eyes, clearly uncomfortable being the one to say it. I told them it felt wrong. Nobody wanted to hear it. I made a decision after that dinner that surprised even me. Rather than accepting the lump sum payout, the option most lottery winners choose, I elected the annuity structure through the State Lottery Commission instead, a series of payments spread out over decades, rather than one enormous, immediately accessible sum. My family read this initially as me being difficult, controlling, punishing everyone for simply asking, not understanding that the decision fundamentally changed what any outside party, including that advance company, could actually access at any single point in time. Once the annuity election was finalized, Farah formally notified the advance company that no future payout rights were available for purchase under the new distribution terms. Closing, cleanly and permanently, the door my mother had quietly tried to open without ever telling me it existed. My mother's fury once that deal collapsed finally said something out loud that I think had been sitting underneath everything from the very beginning. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, still in her coat, pacing my small kitchen, while I stood by the counter, arms crossed, bracing myself. Family money was never meant to be hoarded by one person, she told me, standing in my own kitchen this time, her voice sharp in a way I'd rarely heard from her. Your education, your whole career, that was an investment this family made in you. This is just the return coming back around. An investment, I repeated slowly, and she nodded like the words settled the entire matter. Mom, I paid for my own degree, every semester. She waved a hand, the same dismissive gesture I remembered from arguments over curfews decades earlier. You know what I mean. We supported you. Emotionally. That counts for something. I want you to understand how deeply that framing had probably felt true to her, and how completely it didn't match reality, the two of us standing in my kitchen with an entire family's worth of assumptions collapsing quietly in the space between us. I pulled my own decade-old student loan payoff statements that same evening, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, printing out documentation showing, in flat, undeniable numbers, that I had financed and repaid my own education entirely independently, working 2 jobs through most of my 20s to do it. I didn't wave the papers at her dramatically. I simply laid them on the counter and said, quietly, that I appreciated everything she'd given me growing up, but that this specific claim wasn't accurate, and I needed her to understand that before we talked about anything else. My father approached me differently, a few days later sitting across from me at a diner, rather than in anyone's kitchen. No spreadsheet, no demand, just an aging man admitting, quietly, that he was scared, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup he never lifted to drink. He'd aged more than I'd let myself notice lately, I realized, watching him across that booth, the fluorescent light not kind to the lines around his eyes. "I'm not asking you for the whole thing," he said, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "I just don't know how we're going to keep paying down what we already owe, and I didn't want to keep hiding it from you." I asked him gently why he'd never told me about the medical debt directly, why it had taken a laminated spreadsheet and a stranger's phone call about an advance company for me to learn any of this. He was quiet for a long moment. "Pride, I guess," he finally said. "Your mother handles the money conversations. I just try to keep my head down and pay what I can each month." I want to be honest that this conversation moved me more than anything my mother had said, complicating my resolve, in a way the spreadsheet and the advance company application never managed to. I agreed in the days that followed to help pay off my father's specific medical debt directly, contacting the hospital's billing department myself and settling the remaining balance in full, refusing deliberately to route that money through the family shared spreadsheet or through my mother's hands at all. It was compassion, drawn with a clear, deliberate line around it, separating genuine need from a system that had been quietly designed, whether anyone fully admitted it to themselves or not, to consume the entire payout. My brother's truck situation unraveled publicly not long after, unable to keep up with payments on a vehicle he'd financed, assuming a windfall that never actually arrived the way he'd planned around it. The truck eventually repossessed from his own driveway on an ordinary Tuesday morning, a consequence entirely of his own premature decision-making. It became, unfairly but entirely predictably, one more thing the family quietly blamed me for. Another example of me punishing everyone for simply wanting to be included in something good that had happened to one of their own. I didn't disappear with my winnings, and I didn't hand over 92% of them either. I paid my father's medical debt directly. I contributed a modest, clearly bounded gift toward a specific, necessary repair on my parents' aging roof, an amount I decided on my own terms, communicated once without negotiation. I declined every other request that came in the weeks and months that followed, calmly, consistently, the same way I'd handle a risk assessment that simply didn't pencil out no matter how many times someone asked me to run the numbers again. My relationship with my family remains real, but permanently recalibrated, the specific kind of closeness that exists once everyone finally understands where the actual boundaries sit. We still have Sunday dinners, though smaller and quieter than they used to be. My mother's laminated spreadsheet never mentioned again by anyone at that table, though I suspect it's still filed away somewhere in a drawer she hasn't opened in months. My father calls me now sometimes just to talk, no request attached, a habit that took months to feel normal for either of us. My mother's version of this story, that I chose money over family, never quite caught on with the people who'd actually watched that spreadsheet get built in the first place. Watched an application get filed in my name before I'd ever agreed to any of it, watched a truck get repossessed from a decision nobody but my brother had actually made. I think about that laminated spreadsheet sometimes, my mother's finger tapping twice against a number that was supposed to be my entire share of something extraordinary that had happened to me. I don't think about it with the same sharp shock anymore. I think about it as the exact moment I understood that the skill I'd spent my whole career building, reading fine print carefully, questioning numbers before I trusted them, was never just a professional habit. It was, apparently, the only thing standing between me and a family, fully prepared to plan my entire windfall away, before I'd even had the chance to fully feel glad about winning it. If there's a number in your own life that someone else has already quietly decided belongs to them before you've said a single word about it, I hope this reminds you that generosity and boundaries were never actually opposites, whatever anyone tells you otherwise. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments, and if you believe patience, documentation, and quiet clarity can protect what's actually yours without destroying the people you love, stay close, because Sweet Payback Stories has another one waiting for you very soon.